Okay, I'm going to talk about addiction. Now, the point of this video isn't to look at any specific addiction or to criticize people's addictions, but the point of this video is to make you think about your addictions, okay? And in that light, you have to ask yourself a question, okay? Why are we addicted to things? Why are we addicted to things like alcohol and other drugs and processed food and gambling? Why do we become addicted to things? Well, it seems to me that we are coping for stress in our life, right? These addictions serve as coping mechanisms. They're like self-medication for all of this stress that we have. And the source of that stress, we don't really know. Maybe the source of all our stress in our lives is the microbiome. Maybe our microbiome is so out of balance that we're stressed, and then that stress leads to vicious cycles. We our microbiome isn't producing enough serotonin, and then by extension we have to replace that serotonin and dopamine with dopamine rushes from drugs and alcohol and gambling. Or maybe that stress is sourced from somewhere else. Maybe it's financial stress. Maybe it's stress in your relationships. We don't know exactly what the source of the stress is. However, we do know one thing. Okay, we know that there are good and bad ways to deal with stress. There are unhealthy and healthy coping mechanisms. Now, to add a little nuance to that, we generally consider exercise a healthy coping mechanism, right? But if you go out and run 100 miles and break your leg, that's not a healthy coping mechanism. If you deal with your food addictions by running 10 miles a day so you can shove food in your mouth, that's not a healthy coping mechanism. But in general, if we use these coping mechanisms in moderation, the healthy ones like exercise or healthy diets, if we use them in moderation, then they're going to be healthy, and they're going to be better. They're going to be healthier than the unhealthy ones like alcohol and binge eating and gambling and other drugs, right? The point is that we need to become more conscious of what coping mechanisms we are using for the stress in our life. And the first step in that process is to admit that these drugs and these addictions that we have are coping mechanisms. If you can't admit that the reason you feel the need to buy a six-pack on your way home from work every day is because you're stressed out, because work is beating you down, or life in general, then you're never going to take the steps to fix that addiction, to get rid of that addiction. We have to admit that there is a problem before we can fix the problem. That's what the first step in Alcoholics Anonymous, right? And it's kind of strange. I actually live near Akron, Ohio, and there's Alcoholics Anonymous was founded in Akron, Ohio. Strangely enough, it's and likewise, I used to be an alcoholic. I used to drink, and I wasn't perfect. I'm not saying that I was perfect. I'm not trying to look down on anybody again. I'm not criticizing anyone. And then I got sick of the hangovers, and then I replaced the alcohol with weed, and then I started abusing the weed, right? Everything in moderation, right? And then I abused the weed, and I did, however, learn to break out of that cycle, and I replaced the weed with exercise and a healthy diet. And I smoke occasionally now, but very rarely. And the point is that we can break out of these vicious cycles. And what happens when you break out of them is you create benevolent cycles, right? So if we look at successful people who are happy, and I mean both of those things, okay? There's a lot of financially successful people who are not happy. If we look at people who have both those things, who are financially successful and happy, a lot of them have one thing in common, okay? They choose the healthy coping mechanisms over the unhealthy ones, and they do it consistently, okay? And the reason I'm pointing this out is because if we all learn to choose these healthy coping mechanisms over the unhealthy ones collectively as a society, then what happens is, as a society, we fix the stress with healthy coping mechanisms. And then the unhealthy ones stop holding us down. They stop holding us underwater. And what do I mean by that? Well, when you pick that six pack up on your way home from work, the only reason you pick that up is because you feel like shit. You feel like you need it to be happy, to get through that night, right? And the reason for that is because you become dependent on alcohol for dopamine. And that means when you're sober, your dopamine levels they're in the dirt, right? And that effectively creates a dependence on that alcohol to feel good. Whereas if you exercised and you ate healthy and you found other healthier coping mechanisms, your serotonin production would be up. Your natural dopamine production would be high, and you wouldn't be so dependent on these unhealthy mechanisms. And then, if we collectively do that as a society, we're all happier. We're all become less divided along these political, racial, social, cultural, and like religious divides. And then we fix the problems in society, the underlying problems. And a lot of the stress that we have today can be credited to the economic structure, right? And yet we keep electing politicians who don't fix that economic structure. And they don't fix it because they don't actually represent us. They fool us into thinking they're going to represent us, and then they don't. And we are so divided as the working class, the middle and lower class, that we don't realize that this two-party system is not representing us. And we keep electing these politicians from this two-party system. And again, we know the corruption's there. So what I mean to say here is that if we all get our own lives in order, if we all get rid of our unhealthy coping mechanisms that are driving this system, okay, the food industry pays us, it gives us crappy food, we get unhealthy, then we feel like crap because the unhealthy food is all we're eating, and then we drink alcohol because we feel like crap, then we go to the doctor and buy their drugs because we feel like crap. It's all a vicious cycle that's feeding ultimately back into the poor economy, and that a poor economy feeds back into the stress. If we all collectively get on board with these healthy coping mechanisms, if we all give up our addictions, then we can create a better world for everybody, and namely for the working class, the middle and lower class. Now, in this process, how do we choose the better coping mechanisms? How do we make this transition from these addictions to a healthy lifestyle? Well, if you quit cold turkey, you're probably going to relapse, okay? Because, again, you're trying to make a lifestyle change that is so drastic that you're not prepared for it. So instead, make a slow transition. Replace the unhealthy coping mechanisms with slightly healthier coping mechanisms, and make slightly better diet choices. And every day, every week, whatever, make better choices, and those choices will compound into benevolent cycles. And again, those benevolent cycles are what enables successful people and happy people to be happy and successful. Again, if you look at their behaviors, it's because they are choosing the right coping mechanisms, the healthy ones, and they're creating benevolent cycles rather than getting stuck in these vicious cycles of unhealthy addictions. So, we are conditioned to depend on these unhealthy coping mechanisms, right? If you see the commercial and you see the beautiful couple drinking and having a great time drinking Jack Daniels or whatever, that's so rarely the reality, right? Most of the time, you pick up that six pack when you're on your way home and you're like, yes, I can get through the night without going insane. It's like, we have to make the transition away from these addictions, and we have to make that transition individually, and we can depend on each other in the process. Okay, spend time with those other people who are addicted to things. Work on the problems together, because again, this is a collective issue. And if you replace alcohol with a little weed use, and then you replace that weed use with a little bit of exercise, and those processed foods with healthier foods. You slowly make these changes, and before long, a year or two, you will be in a much better place. And if you've never been in this place, then you need to try it. Okay, you have to get there at least once, and to know what it's like. Because if you don't know what it's like, then you can't criticize the people who tell you to make those changes. You can't criticize me for encouraging you to make those changes. And again, there's probably some stress variability between individuals, right? If you make the claim that you are more stressed out than me, therefore you need these addictions more than I do, then that you're justifying your own bad behaviors to the detriment of your own health. It's terrible logic, and it's only harming you. It's not harming me directly. Maybe indirectly it harms me, but not directly. You're only hurting yourself. Again, I just want you to become conscious of the coping mechanisms you choose to deal with your stress. And if we collectively do this, I do believe we will fix all of the problems in society. And it begins with individuals. It begins by admitting that these coping mechanisms are coping for stress that you have in your life, and there's nothing shameful about that. Okay, as I said, everyone's addicted to something. Everyone does something with their time, and by extension, that means they're addicted to whatever that something is. All we have to do is tip the scales towards the healthier addictions. I'm more or less addicted to exercise. I rarely drive my car anymore. I bike to the store. I bike everywhere I go. I try to anyway. And I love it. I absolutely love it. My family looks at me like I'm crazy. They think I am, they feel bad for me, I think. And that's the thing. It's like, this is what drives me now. This is my drug. And the thing about cycling is that it's not even a high impact exercise. You can't hurt yourself cycling unless you cycle way more miles than you're prepared to do. You need to, again, just question the conditioning that you've been led into by society. Okay, all these processed foods and this alcohol and the gambling, it's shoved in your face 24/7, and then people see that, they get hooked on these addictions, and then it reinforces the cycle that these addictions are normal. Now, they are normal because we use them, and we use them predominantly, right, as a collective society. But we need a new normal, and that new normal will bring a lot of societal changes, from economic changes to the changes within our own home. We will see each other differently. Our relationships will improve, and we can probably, from there, I think the sky's the limit. I think we can, if we fix this country, if we fix the United States, I think we will be inspired to change the rest of the world. If we manage to elect a president who actually inspires us truly deep down, and who speaks truthfully about the problems like the problems I'm trying to talk to you about here, I think we can fix the world. I do. I think we will be motivated to do so, because we will replace these unhealthy addictions that have been keeping us down. And you could say that there's some sinister motivations behind these addictions, and I believe there is. I believe the people who run these the food industry and the pharmaceutical industry and the alcohol industry, the drug industry, that they know the effects that these things have on us, and it allows them to control us. And I could get into a whole spiel about divide and conquer strategies, but just keep this about addictions, okay? Again, for the 5th time, look at the coping mechanisms that you use to deal with the stress in your life, and become conscious of the whether they are healthy or unhealthy, and choose the healthier ones and make that transition fairly slowly. Replace the unhealthy stuff with healthy stuff, and in time, you will become a happier person. You will reverse the vicious cycles into benevolent cycles. And if we do that as a collective society, I think we can change the world. So, thanks for watching.